Hi everyone. Sometimes to tell a story, you have to break the rules. We now hit upon a trilogy in the larger tale in which I break two rules. I need to take you back in time, way outside of the decade in question, to the 90s, and I need to tell you the beginning, the ending, and then, finally, the middle of this story. It's the story that defines the decade. The end of my marriage. The first half of the 90s was a heady time, just not one of drugs and alcohol. It was a whirlwind of fandom. If I wasn't discussing genre TV shows, I was watching genre TV shows. If I wasn't talking about role-playing games, I was running role-playing games. Yeah, back in the time when I ran them serially, one after another. Quite often linked to genre films or TV shows themselves. If I was doing none of those things, I was going to science fiction conventions and getting involved in the whole fancy dress thing. Essentially cosplay. We just didn't call it like that because we just didn't call it that back then. It was a whole lot less professional. All with the same tight group of friends. It sounds really strange, but it was absolutely intoxicating and was my period of peak fandom. I even met my future wife at a Star Trek convention. She was married at the time. Was it love at first sight? Hard to say. Possibly. It was certainly something not long after first sight. We deluded ourselves into the narrative of us just being friends and looked forward to our two friend groups meeting at conventions a couple of times a year. When not at conventions, we sent each other letters. Some were even handwritten, back when I could handwrite. Of course, I wasn't sending letters to her, but the two of them, because of course she was married. I honestly believed I wasn't betraying anyone with these letters. They both read them. They were just stories about my life and interests, not too similar to this missive that you're listening to now. Just with substantially worse spelling. There was no romance involved. All that was true. But let's be honest here and now, deep down in the recesses of my psyche, so deep my conscious mind would not even begin to know how to acknowledge it. I knew perfectly well what I was doing. Within the limits of the situation, we were dating via letters. If it wasn't for the fact she was married, people would be looking back at this with a suitably 90s romantic soundtrack and a montage of us writing and posting opening letters. It was romantic. People can marry the wrong person, right? I remember when she split with her husband. I was working in Aberdeen at the time, and that decision itself had been the subject of a surreal conversation laden with subtext as if we were lovers being torn apart, despite already living in different places and not even being in a relationship. I got a call from a mutual friend telling me she had split. The conversation was also a series of complexities over what was not said, as it was one big fishing exercise by proxy. Oh, good, right? Marriage was at an end. She was free. No, it was a disaster. Did I communicate the situation badly because I felt sorry for her husband? Because we were friends. Did I introduce problems because of subconscious guilt? Did she read too much into some things and lack the perspective under stress? I knew things were getting confused. The situation, relationships and intentions were being misinterpreted. If there was a transition with a hoped for goal, it was going to shit. I was too young and naive to stop it. I thought we'd be okay because of course we were meant for each other, right? It was where she'd end up. So I did think it would be okay. Myself and another friend were going to pick her up so she could spend the weekend in the northeast. I mean, he had a car, I didn't. We drove up, we picked her up, and she seemed distant, I have to say. We got back to the northeast, and I was unceremoniously dropped off. No talking early into the morning. She was staying with my friend since his parents' house had the room. It was very confusing at the time, though I think my subconscious mind knew what was going on. I didn't sleep all night. In the morning it was obviously what had happened, and it was absolutely devastating. She had literally slept with the guy that other night. To this day I still have trouble listening to Mr. Brightside by the Killers. Because to me, it's a story of a man being betrayed by someone he's intimately attached to. I'm sure the song isn't actually about that at all, but that's how I read the lyrics due to my life experience. And I know what people are thinking now, right, listening to this. How the hell did you end up marrying this woman? And that's unfair. While devastating, I came to understand it as a positive. In fact, we both did, to be honest. Ultimately, for a year or so, we became actual friends. No one was conducting some sort of subtextual romance. We just became firm friends. Why was this ultimately a good thing? Because that friend she ended up with, he was a breakup guy, right? And watching it from the outside, glad it wasn't me. I'm not sure if our relationship would have survived it, I have to say. I don't think I was ready to be the intense, difficult relationship breakup guy. Instead, two friends, unburdened by a marriage breakup, started a relationship. Our relationship was ultimately a bit like Thanos, in that it was inevitable. We didn't know when the finger snap would be enacted. Moving into that relationship pretty much meant I split from that whole friend group, as staying within it would have just doomed that relationship before it started. I remember the distinct moment I decided to marry her. To this day, I was doing 10 working days on and 4 working days off, rather than travelling up to Aberdeen weekly. And she'd come up for the weekend when I was in Aberdeen. I'd meet her off the train. Cue more romantic 90s music and people meeting each other on train platforms. Sunday came around and we'd forgotten the clocks had changed. We turned up for the train, only for it to have already left an hour ago. She decided to stay another night, hastily called work, and we made a crazy decision to go to the amusement park on Aberdeen Promenade. It was absolutely freaking freezing. We went on the log flume, and at the top of the ride hill, gripping the side of the log so tightly I thought my hands would freeze to it. Both of us laughing. At that point, I knew I was going to marry her. You could say I'd sort of known for a while, but it was that point it became real. I forget how long it was after. I would have looked it up for this video, but I didn't overly see the need to get too involved in that. Of when I asked her to marry me, and that was in Aberdeen. We purchased the engagement ring in Aberdeen. We got married in 1996, not in Aberdeen. Nigh on 20 years of being happily married forward. I tell you this tale some 14 years before my so-called decade starts, because it is impossible to relate the story of my divorce without it. You need the beginning, middle and the end, not just the end. The end we'll get to next. Until the next chapter, you can support me by doing a few simple things. Like the video, subscribe and hit the bell icon. Certainly post a comment, and let's continue to make small great changes to make life a story worth telling.